knows. Yeah, Janice, will you just announce sort of so everybody knows? We do have one other topic, which is the United Auto Workers are in to make a presentation on, along with our Director of Workforce Supplier and Diversity Development, but their speakers are not all here yet, so we are going to go ahead. I don't see the Suffolk team.
They were right outside.
Yeah, I saw some.
Yeah, so. Yeah, they start to come.
Mr. Chairman, Mr.
Oh, you're here,
Baker's
okay,
yes.
all right. I
Yes.
didn't know you were here.
Yeah.
All right, let me just put this in context. These are just my own words, and if any commissioner either disagrees or wants to add your own thoughts to this, please do. The commission has always taken a very strong and consistent position that the issues pertaining to the local decision-making, host community agreement, the referendum, et cetera, are mandated by the legislature to be handled at the local level. And we have always taken the position that it was very important to respect that local control, to let the applicants and the local communities manage this process as they pleased. We have, however, put two caveats on that. One is that the local process not impede our process, and secondly, that the local process not reflect badly on the integrity of the overall process. It has happened before that a situation arose, if you remember, when Springfield decided to do their own competitive bidding process. The press, the public, we said, can they do that? Nobody really thought about it before. We did have a hearing, we talked about it, we heard their thought process, we talked about it amongst ourselves, and we decided that it did not impede our process, nor did it reflect badly on the integrity of our process, so we let them go forward. I think it's safe to say that nobody quite anticipated what's been happening in East Boston Revere and with the Suffolk Downs applicant. I hear and where I go, again, people saying, can they do that? And I felt, and I think the other commissioners feel the same way, that the uncertainty around that question and the issues being raised about can they do that, follow the plan that Suffolk is laying out, is causing enough concern and uncertainty that it runs the risk both of impeding our process and reflecting badly on the integrity of the process if it doesn't get addressed. So it's important for us to ask interested parties to come in and explain what the thought process is, what is happening. We have not decided whether we're going to vote, whether we're going to discuss, whether we're going to think about it and come back. This is all happening de novo. But that's the context about why we are colloquially asking the question, can they do this? The specific questions that we have asked to elicit that answer are found on page which? 5D. Thank you. And I do want to read them. We have circulated these questions to all of the parties that have been invited to speak. One, please indicate the status of the host community agreement with Revere and the applicant's position on how the existing host community agreement can be amended to accommodate the proposed project. Also address the issue of the referendum that was held and how it supports the proposed project and host or surrounding community agreements. Two, please address the question of what constitutes the, quote, gaming establishment as defined in Chapter 23K, Section 2, as applied to the proposed project and the existing racetrack. Three, please explain how the racetrack or 2014 racing meeting may be affected by the proposed location of the project solely in Revere. What are the plans for the track after the 2014 meet? Please discuss the application of Chapter 23K, Section 19 to the proposed project. We've asked the applicants to speak. We've asked the Mayor of Revere to speak. We've asked representatives from No Eastie Casino to speak, and we have invited a representative or two from proponents in Revere to speak, and we will take them in that order. When you're done, don't go too far away, because I'm sure we will be talking about this a little bit. So, welcome to representatives of the applicant. Mr. Mayor, are you going to go first? Please.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'm happy and appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk to you about the continued enthusiastic support and revere for a Suffolk Downs resort-style casino plan. At our request, the plan now provides for the gaming establishment to be located entirely in Revere. With me is counsel for the city, Brian Falk. I may ask Brian for help with questions that you may have for the city. Also at the table is Chip Tuttle, COO of Suffolk Downs, and their corporate secretary, Charlie Baker. They will answer questions best put to the applicant. What I would like to talk about is the referendum held in Revere and our view of the status of the host community agreement. On November 5th, Revere voters overwhelmingly supported the casino on the Suffolk Downs property located off of Winthrop Avenue. More than 60% voted in favor. Since then, I have been working to ensure that their vote and support for the project continues to be heard. It is my belief that the residents and voters of Revere have been in support for this project, whether the construction is all in Boston, part in Boston and part of Revere, or all in Revere. We did not expect East Boston to vote no. We were planning for 2 yes votes. But our enthusiasm for the project led us to draft the host community agreement, the summary of the agreement, and the ballot question in a way that would allow for the possibility of moving forward only in Revere. When East Boston did vote no, it was obvious that the proposal that Suffolk Downs had been promoting could not proceed. But the people of Revere had spoken strongly in favor of a casino, and I asked Suffolk Downs to work with us to see if the project could be moved in its entirety to Revere. I am glad that they are doing so. If you look at the city's election materials, I would like to cite 2 provisions that are consistent with building the casino solely on Revere property. 1, the ballot question itself stated, shall the city of Revere permit the operation of a gaming establishment licensed by the Massachusetts Gaming Commission to be located at the Suffolk Downs property off of Winthrop Avenue?
Is Winthrop Avenue in Revere?
In Revere. It does not mention East Boston or tie the Revere vote to a successful vote in East Boston. That was not by accident. 2, the summary of the host community agreement was printed on every ballot. It specifically identified the provisions of the host community agreement that allow for the renegotiation of the agreement, the so-called reopeners. One of those reopeners provides that the agreement can be amended if Suffolk Downs develops a casino on the Revere side of the property. Many have noted that a Revere-only casino is not the project that was promoted by Suffolk Downs before the election. I do not dispute that. But it is true that Chip Tuttle did recognize before the election the possibility of proceeding only in one community. Also, and more importantly, is the fact that we have always wanted a Revere focus to the casino. From the very beginning, we asked Suffolk Downs to build all or at least part of the project in Revere. And frankly, we were disappointed that their initial plan, placed this new construction in East Boston. I am convinced that if the plan had been for a Revere-only proposal prior to the election, it would have been even a greater landslide than it was. Turning to the host community agreement, the City of Revere unequivocally stands behind the agreement as a valid, enforceable contract. In the agreement, the city invites Suffolk Downs to build in Revere. Paragraph 3E says, the city wishes to encourage the owner to develop additional phases of the project on the Revere property for the purpose of generating additional tax revenue and creating further jobs and economic development. To allow for that possibility, as I said, the agreement expressly obligates the city and Suffolk Downs to negotiate in good faith an amendment to the agreement to mitigate any negative impacts, if any, upon the city. That is a quote from Section 2N of the agreement. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I thank you for your time today. The City of Revere looks forward to working with Suffolk Downs between now and the application deadline on December 31st. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman Crosby, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to come before you today to discuss our plan to move forward in the application process with a proposal to develop a world-class gaming resort on our property in Revere. We are honored to have Mayor Rizzo here with us today. As the mayor mentioned, our corporate secretary, Charlie Baker, is here with me as well. I'll leave it to Charlie to answer the specific questions posed by Commission Counsel to us earlier. And I just want to give you a brief overview if I can. As we've said publicly and in the letter that our chairman, Bill Mulrow, sent to you all last week, we're encouraged by Revere voters' enthusiastic embrace of gaming development at our property in their city based on the results of that November 5th ballot question. While the lack of similar approval in East Boston presents new challenges for us and excludes gaming development on the Boston portion of our property, we, with our team of architects and engineers, environmental consultants, have been working diligently with the mayor and his team since then to meet those challenges with the objective of presenting to you by the end of this year a proposal that locates our gaming establishment entirely in Revere and that meets or exceeds all of the legislative requirements and all of the standards that you have set out for gaming development in the Commonwealth. As always, we have and we will continue to seek this Commission's guidance in matters that relate to our application. In that regard, one of the reasons we're happy to be before you today is this opportunity to make as clear as we can our status as an applicant. Suffolk Downs remains an applicant in good standing, having been found suitable by this Commission and having met the requirements of a valid host community agreement in Revere and a valid land use referendum in Revere. Revere residents have spoken in favor of good jobs, local business partnerships, local road and infrastructure improvements, investment in their community. Every precinct in every ward in Revere voted in favor of our development. Charlie will address specifically your question about racing, but as this body knows, it has always been our plan and our intention to preserve and enhance racing at Suffolk Downs if we are successful in earning a gaming license. That commitment remains given our new circumstances. We have no plans to move the racetrack itself and will continue to pursue options that allow us to preserve our 78-year legacy of thoroughbred racing here. Some have suggested that we would have to close the track to accommodate a gaming facility on the Revere portion of our property. That is simply not true. With the new paradigm of having to site the resort entirely on the Revere portion of the property, we are looking at alternative sites for the current barn area. The use of off-site stabling and training centers is fairly common practice at East Coast racing venues. Horses are stabled and train at Palm Beach Downs, about an hour north of Gulfstream Park, where there is no racing, and are vanned every day to Gulfstream Park in Hallandale, Florida. This afternoon, shortly, may have already started, but at Aqueduct in Queens, New York, as many as half or more of the horses that will start will arrive on vans from Belmont Park, from stabling areas at Belmont Park nearby. This is common practice. As you know, in addition to the direct employment at Suffolk Downs, hundreds of hardworking people make their living in some way taking care of the horses that race at our facility. Owners, breeders, trainers, jockeys, exercise riders, grooms, stable hands, blacksmiths, feed and tack suppliers, veterinarians licensed by this body, these people depend on racing. A report by Christensen Capital Advisors and Salem State University that we commissioned as part of our application process estimates 1,486 jobs supported by the thoroughbred racing industry in the Commonwealth, and projects that number could more than double if we're successful in earning a gaming license. That does not include the thousands of good jobs that would be created at the gaming facility itself. Among the applicants for a resort casino license in the Commonwealth, the additional economic benefits, those additional economic benefits are unique to Suffolk Downs. We look forward to covering this in greater detail with you in the coming weeks and as part of our RFA2 submission by December 31st. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tuttle.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I know the questions were targeted at the applicant, but the city would like to take a first crack at question one, which has to do with the agreement itself and the ballot question.
Okay.
As mentioned by Mayor Rizzo, Revere's host community agreement with Suffolk Downs is in full force and effect, legally binding on both Suffolk Downs and the city. No termination provisions were triggered by the election on November 5th. To the contrary, the agreement accommodates the exact situation that resulted from the November 5th election. Section 2N of the agreement contains a reopener provision requiring both parties to negotiate an amendment to the agreement if Suffolk Downs intends to develop its casino on the Revere side of its property. This provision was drafted precisely to accommodate the situation that we are in today. We knew that development on the Revere side of the property may present additional impacts for Revere, and we wanted the right to reopen the agreement to mitigate those impacts. Suffolk Downs recently invoked that reopener, notifying the city of its plans to develop a casino solely in Revere. We have begun negotiations to amend the agreement, exactly as spelled out in Section 2N. As required by your regulations, specifically 205 CMR 127, the reopener provided in Section 2.1, or 2N, was described in the clear and concise summary of the host community agreement, which was published and which was printed on all ballots used on November 5th. Regarding that election, as mentioned by Mayor Rizzo, the ballot question before the voters on November 5th made no reference to East Boston. The question simply asked, shall the city of Revere permit the operation of a gaming establishment licensed by the Mass Gaming Commission to be located at the Suffolk Downs property off of Winthrop Avenue? The city solicitor and I spent considerable time drafting this question with two goals in mind. First and foremost, we wanted the question to provide a fair and accurate description of the property, which was the subject of the land use referendum. Second, we specifically intended that the ballot question would accommodate both development scenarios for Suffolk Downs, a casino on the Boston side of the property or a casino on the Revere side of the property. Although considered a remote possibility at the time, we wanted to ensure that if East Boston voted no, the ballot question in Revere would give us the opportunity to still be a host community for a property located only in Revere. We would have drafted the question exactly the same if Suffolk Downs' original plan only called for development in Revere, because the description of the property would have been exactly the same. As noted earlier, voters in Revere were informed that the host community agreement would be amended if Suffolk Downs developed on the Revere side of its property. The reopener was published in the summary of the host community agreement and printed on all ballots. Voters were therefore made aware as clearly as possible that the agreement, which was a prerequisite to the land use referendum, would be amended if the casino was developed on the Revere side of the property. The City of Revere's host community agreement and ballot question were both drafted with the specific intent of accommodating the exact situation that we find ourselves in today. We look forward to continuing our negotiations with Suffolk Downs and amending our host community agreement to mitigate the impacts of the project located solely in Revere. I know Mr. Baker intends to address questions 2 and 3, but I'm happy to field questions on this point if the commission so chooses.
Commissioners?
The summary, the summary says, insofar as the reopener is concerned, the trigger to which you're referring, I think, is this. Suffolk Downs, reopening is possible, permissible. If, and I'm quoting now, Suffolk Downs expands the casino beyond the Suffolk Downs racetrack property or to the Revere side of the property, close quote. That's the one you're referring to.
That's right.
The verb expands is different than changes. Do you place any significance on that?
Well, the
Or
original,
moves.
sure. The original plan did call for gaming establishment on the Revere side of the property. The track, the horse barns, parking were all amenities of that original proposal.
Right.
Expansion, I'm viewing it as more gaming facility. And under this scenario, we would have certainly much more gaming facility on the Revere side of the property. We would have the casino. This is one of the things that I agree with you. Yep.
Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
This scenario is one of the many we had in mind that could be a trigger to this reopener. This was one of them.
So this was drafted, this provision, this trigger provision was drafted with the thought in mind that the gaming facility is the casino and the track, and
The definition of gaming establishment, correct?
Right. Okay.
Could you read the full section that this reopener refers to? You said it's section 2N or something like that?
Section 2N of the host community agreement?
2N, yeah.
Sure. Section 2N, it's titled Expansion of the Gaming Establishment. If the owner is defined as Sterling Suffolk Racecourse LLC in our agreement, if the owner seeks to expand its gaming establishment onto the Revere property or beyond the property onto property located within or outside the city, the owner shall promptly notify the city, and the parties shall negotiate in good faith an amendment to this agreement to mitigate any negative impacts, if any, upon the city of such expansion.
Well, I raised the same question as Commissioner McHugh. I mean, if you're taking the position that this was always anticipated and that the section was written with this particular case in point, and this is not an expansion of the facility to the Revere side. This is the elimination of the facility altogether and building a fresh one on the new. So if you didn't write what you're saying you were anticipating, you said expansion of the gaming facility.
I respectfully, I disagree. We were going to have gaming facility on the Revere property, otherwise we wouldn't have been a host community in the first place. Under this new proposal, we're going to have much more. That is an expansion, as I understand it. And this is something that Mr. Baker and I discussed during our negotiations when drafting this agreement. Both parties to the agreement agree that that's what this provision means. In any other circumstance, when Party A and Party B are the only parties to the contract, and they agree on what it means, that's usually sufficient. We both agree on what that means. That was our understanding going into it, and we have no dispute over what that provision means right now.
Well, there's actually a third party to the agreement, isn't there? The public? I mean, they voted on something. They voted on, the precise question they voted on. And I'm just exploring
Yep.
this. I haven't come to any decisions, but I think it's important to explore this. This precise question they voted on was the location. And that location is off of Winthrop, as you described it, off of Winthrop Ave. And it isn't tied to the address of Suffolk Downs. But the legislature required the summary to be part of the public presentation of what was to happen. So in addition to the two parties to the agreement, the public had an opportunity, and indeed the statute required you to give them the opportunity to consider the agreement and to think about the agreement as they were voting on the acceptability of the location. So in that regard, it's not simply the two parties to the agreement agreeing on the interpretation of the language, and that does it. Is it really? That's a long question, I know.
It's okay. I view the agreement as a prerequisite to the land use referendum. The referendum didn't ask them to approve the agreement. It asked them to approve siting a gaming facility at a certain location. The publication of the summary to give fair notice to the voters is required by the Gaming Act. The inclusion of the summary on the ballot is something that you required as part of your regulations, which we complied with. And also part of your regulations was a requirement that if there are going to be any reopeners, not amendments that one party seeks and the other agrees to, but triggers that would reopen a renegotiation, you required that that be noted in the summary so that voters were aware of that. And that's exactly what we did. The voters were well aware, if they had chosen to read through the summary, that there would be a reopener provision, that the parties would meet and sit down and negotiate additional mitigation in the event that the gaming establishment was expanded onto the Revere side of the property.
Well,
that was on the ballot.
No question about that. And it really comes down to what is the meaning that the reasonable reader would attach to the word expands. That's my concern. That's the focus of this inquiry. So I hear you. I understand your answer. Thank you.
Just a couple of other questions. Has the city council taken any position on this?
The city council took a vote of confidence. They were not required to, but when we presented the host community agreement to the city council, they voted unanimously in support of the host community agreement.
I meant subsequent to whatever the new plan is going to be. Have they taken?
Well, I haven't presented any
So
of
they haven't,
the.
at the moment, they haven't taken a position.
there's, up to now, other than just conversations amongst myself and various counselors, they haven't taken a formal position yet, but safe to say that I have not spoken to a counselor who does not support our efforts to go forward.
Okay. And what was your reference to Mr. Tuttle speaking, acknowledging this possible eventuality before the referendum? Or, yeah, before the referendum?
Mr. Tuttle, I think, has made it very clear as he's traveled throughout, certainly the city of Revere. I can't speak to East Boston, but, you know, the question would occasionally come up from somebody, what happens if one city votes against it and one city doesn't? And I think he's always been clear that, that the possibility would exist to relocate to one city or the other. He said, you know, there was always the caveat with, you know, we'd have to, you know, we'd have to navigate through the process. You know, so certainly it was always our expectations that both communities would vote yes, but you know, while we hoped for a yes vote, we always wanted to plan, you know, that in the event of what actually ended up happening, that the city of Revere would be protected, and we have felt right along that has been the case based on our host community agreement.
Is that formally on, is that in writing or tape or somewhere? Is that you're saying those words?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. You, particularly more than anyone in the commission, might identify with the hazards of speaking publicly and
What do you mean by
extemporaneously.
that?
But on several instances, I was asked about the possibility of whether we could move forward or not in the event of one positive vote and one negative vote. And I tried to be as concise and as candid as possible, as I always do. On September 9th, at a public meeting on our DEIR, I was actually asked that question by a member of the No East Casino group, and that response was taped and is on our website, and you're welcome to look at it, and we're happy to share it with everybody. But while encouraging that person to vote yes, I did clearly keep open the possibility that in the event of a yes vote in one community or the other, that we could move forward. And I do recall saying it would be really difficult, which I think are the circumstances we are in today. Similarly, in Revere, several times I was asked about development on the Revere portion of the property, and the idea that the seasonal home for 800 to 1,000 horses was not necessarily the best use of that land. A lot of residents in Revere felt that way and tried to be consistent about the fact that we could develop on the Revere side of the property.
I would be interested in seeing the actual quote. I guess we can find it too. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you've asked us to address 3 sets of questions. I think the mayor's and Brian's comments have gone a long way to addressing the first group of questions about the validity of the Revere vote and the Revere host community agreement. Let me add that Suffolk agrees that the host community agreement is a valid and binding contract subject to amendment as described in the summary. You've asked us to address further the question of what constitutes the gaming establishment, as defined in Chapter 23K in Section 2, as applied to the proposed project we will be presenting to you. To answer, you have to start with the statutory definition of gaming establishment, which is the premises approved under a gaming license, which includes a gaming area and any other non-gaming structure related to the gaming area, and may include, but shall not be limited to, hotels, restaurants, or other amenities. 3 additional statutory definitions are important to applying the definition of gaming establishment: gaming area, gaming, and game. A gaming area is the portion of the premises of a gaming establishment in which or on which gaming is conducted. Gaming is dealing, operating, carrying on, conducting, maintaining, or exposing any game for pay. A game is a banking or percentage game played with cards, dice, tiles, dominoes, or any electronic, electrical, or mechanical device or machine played for money, property, checks, credit, or any other representative of value which has been approved by the Commission. Neither the statute nor commission's regulations define the other words in the definition of gaming establishment. So how does all this apply to our Revere-only project? It may sound simplistic, but we've redesigned the property to the gaming establishment to solely be within the confines of the city of Revere. And let me put this in some perspective. We've been guided very much so by the commission's statutory guidance, the statute, your regulatory guidance, and have taken and observed an interest, the discussion you had with the Wynn operator about the location of the gaming establishment in Everett as it related to portions of the property seller owned in Boston. We took with interest your decision in the Plain Ridge case and your discussion recently about HCA reopeners. So all that's in the context of the way we think about this and how we think we will present this to you in an RFA2 submission. And let me put this also in perspective. Of the two other applicants who have valid land use votes who were before you for an RFA1 license, both of their sites are smaller than our land in Revere. We have, as we keep the racetrack as a separate project, there remain 42 acres in Revere where we can put a gaming establishment. The Everett parcel is 25 acres, the Springfield parcel is 16. So the notion that we could not find room to have a first-class destination resort casino on parcels bigger than the other two applicants, I just don't think has any merit. So then the question is, how does this relate to the racetrack? And the short answer is that under Section 19, we have an obligation to maintain the racetrack, and we will maintain the racetrack. We would have that obligation if we filed for in Region C and got a license in Region C. That requirement is peculiar to this applicant and to the Plain Ridge applicant. It has nothing to do with the function of the gaming establishment. Finally, you've asked some questions about how...
Can I just ask a question there? How did, in the original host community vote that actually took place, how did Revere become a host community?
I always thought Revere was a host community. Look, I think there are four answers to that question. The first is, the first is that Suffolk Downs has been a good neighbor. And frankly, we wanted to have Revere to be a host community agreement because we thought that they would have impacts and they deserve equal treatment. So that was number one. Two, we were having portions of the gaming establishment in Revere.
Which portions?
Parking, and some maintenance facilities. I mean, we took a very, I don't want to talk about other hearings, but we took a very conservative approach to what's in a gaming establishment. And we would argue that necessary parking is part of a gaming establishment. So we took the position that because we were going to have parking in Revere, Revere was part of the facility. More importantly, we are enthusiastic about the notion of a destination resort casino. And as Chip has suggested, we've always had in the back of our head the idea that you could relocate the stables and make more use of the land. The mayor was always encouraging for us to expand the use into Revere. So we had the original project been approved, we would have come to you and said, designate the entire site as a gaming establishment, because we would like to, over time, come to you and have other buildings built in the Revere side of the project. Lastly, there was the racetrack, but in my view, that was an argument, but not the strongest of the arguments as to why Revere was part of the gaming establishment.
What do you make of Section 24 that requires the applicant, if successful, to maintain and if the applicant's a racing licensee, to maintain an existing racing facility on the premises?
We're going to maintain an existing racing facility on the premises.
But the premises...
The premises is not the gaming establishment.
Mm-hmm.
The premises is a defined term in 128A. I think that's where the term comes from. It's not a defined term in 23K.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the definition of premises in?
The definition of premises in 128A, I don't have it before me, but it's basically where you have your racetrack. I would note that, historically Suffolk didn't originally own all this property. It originally leased 110 acres from the original owner of the property, and that was the racetrack. So the shape of the racetrack premises has changed even in my lifetime.
When you were just talking, didn't you refer to the track as part of the racing establishment? You were talking about it as it was originally all the racing establishment was in East Boston. You said the casino, the track, you referred to all of it.
It's our position, and Suffolk backs us up, that gaming establishment was located in Revere under the old plan, and it would be under this new plan.
But you didn't count the track as part of the gaming
Oh,
establishment?
yes, I did.
So it was under the original gaming establishment, but it won't be under this gaming
Right,
establishment.
so look, there's a way we think about this. The new gaming building, the casino proposal, will be solely in Revere. The hotels will solely be in Revere. The parking facilities will solely be in Revere. If a patron in Revere, in the casino wants to walk to the racetrack, he's walking half a mile up the street to make a wager at the racetrack. That is, to put that in some perspective, the Four Seasons is within half a mile of the Hatch Show and the Boston Public Library. I guess that they are also amenities of the Four Seasons, but it's not the amenity described in the statute for a gaming establishment.
So the design of the facility, when it was cheek by jowl with the track really was integrated into the.
Yeah, and that I guess is the point, and maybe I haven't been as clear as I should be. So the original proposal, these things were intertwined. There was no separation. The gaming establishment was in the racetrack building. They were inseparable. They are now separable. They are now separated. There will be a legally distinct parcel solely in the city of Revere that will be the gaming establishment.
Okay. Go ahead.
I hear you.
Thank you.
You're on a roll. You got another question, right? Did you get that?
Oh, yeah, I do have another question. So the other question is, what about the future of the racetrack in 2014 and thereafter? And our short answer is 2014 will be the most challenging. We've said this to you before. If we're granted a racing license, if we're granted a gaming license, we have a racing license, thank you, we got it today. If we're granted a gaming license, depending on when that's granted and when the other permits we need to build the project, the other land use permits, the building permit, we're going to have issues about construction on the site. We would have had that in the old project, as we discussed with you. So 2014 will be challenging. But Chip is bullish about this because with our ultimate aim of finding a remote training facility, and we don't want to talk about this, but Chip is well underway. We've been, as I said, we've had discussions about this for years. And so there are places we've identified where this can happen. This is real. In some ways, having the horses remotely makes it easier than trying to deal with the construction on the site. Our commitment going forward, if this entity or this project is granted a gaming license, the racetrack will remain open in accordance with Section 19. The $40 million in racetrack improvements that were promised will be made, and the quality of racing will improve.
Okay. Other.
But look, it's hard, I think, sometimes when you think of this as a project. This is a vast piece of land. Even giving up even keeping the racetrack, we have 42 acres in Revere where we can build this. These things are not connected to one another, and they will be separate establishments. I also want to make a note that we have every anticipation in the very near future of informing you that we have identified an operator who I believe will meet with your approval. We plan with that operator to file a responsive RFA2. We will meet the December 31st deadline. We will have a completely responsive RFA2 that meets all the criteria in the statute and in your regulations.
Are there any, knowing that there's a separation between the gaming facility and the track, where there wasn't in the original proposal, what does that do? Maybe Mr. Tully, you can answer. What does that do to do you see that having any impact to the fortunes of the track going forward? Now knowing they're separated by a distance as opposed to before when they were attached.
Thank you, Commissioner Stebbins. As Charlie mentioned in the prior proposal, the prior version of our proposal, the facilities were integrated. Now they must be separate based on the East Boston vote. It creates additional challenges, but as Charlie mentioned, we're committed to racing over the long term. We are, in some ways, and I've had conversation with the leadership of the New England HBPA and the Mass Breeders. In some ways, the thought of a state-of-the-art off-site training facility with, brand new barns and a brand new training track and things like that is very appealing to them and hopefully to other horsemen and outfits that we could try to attract with a higher purse structure and things like that. So while it presents a new set of challenges, as Charlie said, we're pretty bullish on racing and trying to make the improvements. Our commitment to racing remains the same regardless of this new paradigm.
So just I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just had a question for Mr. Tuttle. I think what I just heard you say is that the plan would be to permanently relocate barns and training facilities. Is that accurate?
Yes, we have to facilitate completely siting the gaming establishment in Revere, we have to relocate that barn area. And if we're going to do that, we can do it on a temporary basis, we could do it on a semi-permanent basis or a permanent basis based on, and as Charlie said, we've had conversations with people that are interested in that, and we're looking at various options.
Just a couple of points I'd like to add. And this relates to our RFA2 filings. We paid great attention to your Everett conversations, and so did the City of Boston. We believe that we've got a zoning hearing in Revere on December 2nd in front of the City Council and the Planning Board on December 3rd, where the site will be reviewed and outlined. We believe that any fierce review of the site plan will demonstrate that our facility is completely in the City of Revere. We believe that the City of Boston, seeing that, will come to the same conclusion that they did after conversations with you as it relates to Everett. So we have every confidence that fact will be certain to you. We are just asking that you give us the opportunity to file with you an RFA2 that demonstrates with certainty, as opposed to, I hope you believe us, but we don't believe you should just believe us. We believe you should give us the opportunity to file a fulsome filing that demonstrates completely that this gaming establishment is in Revere, that it is first class, that it does what it needs to do, that it manages all its impacts, and it does so in a way that you can be proud of. That's what we're asking.
I have one more question. I know what your answer, Mr. Baker, to this. I think I know what your answer is, but if I let you go without asking it, I'll regret it. We've so far looked at the language, the literal language in the statute, expand, on the premises and the like. What do you say to the question whether the legislative intent, so far as it can be divined from the language that was used, really viewed and designed the requirement for both communities voting with the Suffolk Downs complex in mind?
I believe that the requirements were varied. Okay, I think there was a requirement.
Sorry, what did you say?
Varied. There's more than one requirement, and they each say slightly different things. Okay. I believe that the legislature had a great interest in maintaining live racing in the Commonwealth. As you all know, because in some ways you spend more time on this than you have on some other things, there are vast portions of your statute that create funds to support live racing.
Right.
So the commission the legislature was very focused on the preservation of live racing. They, I think, recognized that there were only 2 racetracks in the Commonwealth who the definition applied to, and it applied them to both of them. Okay, I think they recognized, as we do, that we tried this. The reason this company is called Sterling Suffolk Racecourse LLC is we first tried to build a track in Sterling. Okay, to build, and we found,
really?
like,
Sterling, we were
the
just
guys were
talking
just
about
there,
it
right?
Okay.
It was 1991.
Yeah.
To find a piece of ground with all the wetlands laws in Massachusetts where you can build a mile oval, I will challenge you to find one. All right, let me just say that, because we looked. I think the legislature wanted to preserve that function. We are going to preserve that function, but we are going to build the gaming establishment solely in the city of Revere. And I believe by doing both of those things, we're maintaining the intent and spirit of the statute.
Thank you.
I have a question. Mr. Baker, you mentioned the concept of being a good neighbor, and this is obviously not a legal question, but I'll pose it to whomever. How do you see that, furthering that goal now with the city of Boston?
Commissioner Zuniga, thank you for that question. We take that very seriously, and and we're, as we've said, we're disappointed with the results in East Boston, but I view November 5th as a snapshot in time, and we have a 78-year relationship with that community. So if we are successful in moving forward with Revere, we plan to treat our neighbors in East Boston and the city of Boston as generously as we can, and you know, in good faith, would negotiate a surrounding community agreement with Boston that reflects our longstanding relationship with that neighborhood. So I think, you know, in the immediate results of the ballot questions, there's some emotion and some confusion, but we have a long-term commitment to our neighbors in East Boston, many of whom, we do not forget that many of whom supported us, continue to support us, support our efforts to maintain and enhance the racetrack and to develop a gaming facility. So we look forward to that.
Mr. Baker, Counsel for Everett said that you and he negotiated the terms of the HCA and the terms of the summary, and that you specifically anticipated when you were drafting that the possibility that East Boston might lose and it would have to be relocated to Revere. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. I mean, we never, I don't bet a lot, but I guess, you guys can't bet, because, but you know, I wouldn't have thought I thought there would be very long odds on that happening. None of us really anticipated this, but we did know, and the mayor said this very, very forcefully, and he was right. They continued to urge us to do this project in Revere. They would have loved this to be a Revere-only project. And so we wanted to make sure that that ballot question and that host community agreement addressed the very hypothetical, but it turns out to be real now, potential that that could happen. And in fact, it did happen. It was clearly our intent that this, you know, very unlikely scenario is a scenario that we might be here, as we are here today.
Okay. Anybody else?
No,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess I'd just like to add again, we believe that in our RFA2 filing, with our new qualified operator, who we will be presenting to you in the very near future, we will be able to assure you that every part of this statute and the regulations will be met by this proposal.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Representatives of No Eastie Casino. Welcome.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Chairman Crosby, Commissioners, thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome.
I'm Celeste Myers, co-chair and founding member of No Eastie Casino. And I didn't think we'd be here this soon. I thought I had another 5.5 months or so, but I wasn't naive enough to think that we wouldn't be coming back. I think what we're witnessing today is the manifestation of at least one of 3 scenarios. Now, if the account of the dialogue around the Revere ballot question is true, is just recounted here. One scenario may be deliberate premeditated collusion to separate East Boston from the conversation. That's one scenario. Possibly colossal, complete mismanagement of the education process on behalf of the city of Boston. Or more likely, the third manifestation is being carried out here, and it's a last-ditch, desperate effort to save this bid. Now, clearly, our legislators, as described by Senator Petroselli in a letter recently to you folks, and copied to members of No Eastie Casino, I believe, to the media, described that the spirit of the law is not as it's currently being interpreted by the folks at Suffolk Downs. There is an account in the language of the law that describes that certainly an applicant, upon launching a failed bid for approval by a host community, can certainly relaunch a bid after 6 months. That's where I believe this bid at this juncture should lay. I've been recorded as saying, and it's been distilled to us in many different forms and forums, that if an affirmative vote was not garnered in both East Boston and Revere, the bid was dead, and yet they would have the ability to come back in 6 months. Now, barring that interpretation, on behalf of us, on behalf of the City Council, and even yourself, Chairman Crosby, I hate to be the one to hold you to that, there are several other concerns with the application. At this juncture, we're still at a point where there is a 24% gap in financing. There is no identified operations partner, and even best case scenario, even interpreting the ballot results in Revere to the best advantage of Suffolk Downs, the results are yielded before a plan was even determined. They still have yet to share what the plan is and what the proposal is. So there's kind of a misconnection, a dislocation of operations here as prescribed in the most remedial interpretation of the bill. So I'm inclined to believe that this is a last-ditch effort by folks that spent a lot of money, that don't want to have to wait until a potential next spin, that don't want to sit on the sidelines while viable applicants are going forward. But unfortunately, it's a reasonable expectation for the folks of East Boston, the folks across the state, to interpret the language of the bill as we have. And as we have, participated in the education process of the residents of East Boston. And one could argue, too, that if it were clear that it could go either way, that an affirmative vote on both sides of the referendum weren't required, that we could have spread out and we could have energized some folks in Revere if we knew that that was truly what was required. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Cameron, our attorney.
Thank you.
So let me just ask you, I think you said that there was frequent discussion about the fact that an affirmative vote in both sides
Sure.
was required. What are you referring to? Who was saying this and when?
Sure.
and
Pretty
so
much
forth?
in every forum. At the forefront, there was Mayor Menino's Host Community Advisory Committee that described that in many forums. There were other mayor's office-led forums, and it was certainly inferred, if not stated outright, by members of the Suffolk Downs team.
I'd be interested in, if you have it anywhere, the actual words are useful, and if you have them anywhere, I'd be interested in seeing them.
Sure.
What Mr. Tuttle or Mr. Baker both said was, let us go forward and submit to you a proposal on December 31st so that you can see concretely what we're talking about. What would be the harm in that?
The harm is that they got their answer at the ballot box. And so, the law is understood by us, by over 4,000 voters in East
Right.
Boston,
Right.
would, seem to expect and be reasonable to expect that this conversation is over at least for another 5.5 months.
Right, but if we wanted to we wanted to make no decision at this moment. The commission wanted to make no decision and simply wait until it saw the final proposal to make sure that there was nothing, that proposal changed or didn't change. Wouldn't that be, how would the Noeasti Casino folks be hurt by that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess I'm struggling to find the value in that if the conversation is over at this juncture, because, you know, per the language in the law and reasonable interpretation of the law, as my
Right.
estimation
No, I hear
and
you.
those of
I
the
hear
voters
you.
of East Boston, I'm not sure what the value is. I think that other applicants may take even higher exception to it than I would, with, you know, allowing Suffolk Downs, having gone through the process this far, with a lot of exceptions, with you know, more lives than most cats have, to be giving yet another exception and take another bite at the apple before other applicants have been able to fairly, you know, go through the course, and other applicants that have had affirmative votes within their host communities.
If I may.
All right. I'm not sure, I guess I'm not sure, I don't want to press the point.
Sure.
You've got, but unfairly, but I'm talking, I guess I'm thinking about concrete harm to the Noeasti Casino interest. I understand the principle of the thing. I understand perfectly the principle of the thing.
Sure.
But in
It's
terms
not
of-
even principle, so, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but, so you're looking at an organization that has followed this process every step of the way.
Right.
And actually have been engaged since even before this process was laid out, and
Right.
before many of you
Right,
were
right.
installed. So we're feeling like we did our part, we did our job, we stopped at the ballot box, and so, you know, we're still needing to kind of keep our organization going too, financially and personally. And
Right.
quite frankly, I punch a clock, and so I'm here all day not getting paid. That's kind of a concrete example of harm, quite frankly.
I see. You have to stay on guard.
Wow.
Right. Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Good morning. Just very briefly, I know I've filed 5 single-space pages of comments with copious footnotes. I'm going to try to keep it brief and stick to the points here, especially the questions raised, which I think are excellent questions going forward on this. First, I just want to note, the applicants noted that they are still in good standing. I don't think that's the case. The fact is that the commission on October 29th, or October 30th, excuse me, gave them until November 8th, and unless this hasn't been made public, I don't believe they have divested those Caesars shares or have presented a plan, unless the commission knows otherwise. Caesars still owns 4.2%, I believe, of this project, and Caesars was found not suitable, and they were given until November 8th to have them out of the project, and they're still here. So I'm not really sure how it is that they're in good standing.
Actually, you know, actually I recall that, and the record will show it. That deadline was to divest or to present a plan for divestiture.
Exactly. And has there been a plan presented? I guess that's our question at this point. Have we seen a plan?
That's a question. That's not what you said. They have not divested.
Right. No, I also added that they were supposed to have told us what they were doing with those shares, and it's been a couple of weeks now, and that deadline is behind us. So I'm just wondering, that's a question for the applicants, not for the commission.
Yeah.
But I just want to note that our position, just to begin, is that that was a condition of suitability. They're not currently suitable if they missed that deadline without telling us what they're doing with those shares. But to move on, the legislature clearly intended for the people, not the governments, but the people of host communities to have the final approval or the veto over casinos in their communities. There's a reason they put that referendum in there, and there's a reason that Chapter 23K, Section 15, Paragraph 13 was explicitly designed so that projects such as Suffolk Downs, which span 2 communities, would require approval from both communities. You don't have to take my word for it. Senator Petroselli has put an excellent letter into the record. We really appreciate his work on this. He was one of the drafters of the Expanded Gaming Act, and he is before this commission on this record saying that this does not meet the spirit and letter of what he drafted. I think that should be given extreme weight in this case. Along with Senator Petroselli, I'd also like to thank our City Councilor, Sela Matina, Representative Carla Basil. I believe City Councilor-elect Michelle Wu was here before. She also put a letter in, and I believe Councilor Michael Flaherty also supported our position, and I think those should all be given appropriate weight. Commissioners, the last time I appeared before you, I was on behalf of Noeasti Casino. As volunteer counsel, I'm still here in that capacity, but I now also come before you today on behalf of myself as a resident homeowner in East Boston and 4,280 of my neighbors in East Boston, all of whom voted against a casino at Suffolk Downs. Not a casino in East Boston, not a casino in Revere, but a casino at Suffolk Downs, which we were told for several years would span the entire 161-acre property. So there's really only one question before this commission now. what was in the mind of the reasonable voter at the time that any of us went to the polls. And I will concede, I'm not a reasonable voter. I'm an attorney on a volunteer basis representing No East Casino, so I want to look at the source material. The ballot was brought up earlier. There was a very pertinent part of the ballot that was not read to this commission. I think it is very important, and I'm just going to read it into the record. It is entitled, "The Project." Suffolk Downs proposes a resort-style casino at the Suffolk Downs racetrack property located partially in the city and partially in East Boston. Suffolk Downs proposes to invest approximately $1 billion to develop the casino and make improvements to the regional transportation, et cetera, et cetera. If approved by the voters of Revere and Boston, Suffolk Downs would need to win a casino license from the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. We agree with all of that. That was all on the Revere ballot. That was the first thing, essentially, that the voters saw immediately after the land use question, or the alleged land use question. We'd actually argue that that was actually, well, I can get into that if we need be, but the project itself is described explicitly for voters right up top as being the entire property. Anyone who lives in East Boston or Revere would think of Suffolk Downs as the entire property. I don't think before November 5th, November 6th, anyone was dividing that in their heads into the Revere side and the East Boston side, and now we are all too aware of where those lines are. I think that the host community agreement, and the questions were already raised by Commissioner McHugh.
Are you saying that you think that the East Boston voters had the right to say, among other things, that Revere could not have the facility?
The question that I voted on, Commissioner, was as to a casino at 525 McClellan Highway in East Boston, which is 525 McClellan Highway in East Boston, which is the legal address of that property. And it's not so much a matter of can or can't. We were told, again, and I'm going to get into this in a minute, I think, but we were told that this would be both sides, that both sides had to agree. The statute told us that, and we were told every which way at every meeting that I can think of, and I'll get into the one where we weren't in a moment. And it's only logical. We're talking about Suffolk Downs, and the entire campaign put out by the proponents was say yes to Suffolk Downs, not to a casino at Suffolk Downs. That I don't think anyone was mentally splitting that up. And it's not so much about the voters of East Boston telling Revere what to do. We respect their right to come back if they want to have a completely new plan, which resembles nothing at all to what we voted on November 5th. They're welcome to come back and do that in a timely way, in 6 months, as they're permitted to do by statute. We'll fight it then too. But they don't get to do it this way. I'd just like to very quickly hit the issue as to the host community agreement that was raised before, and I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts which were not read. I would, of course, note Commissioner McHugh's question as to the expansion question. I think that is extremely pertinent because my understanding in English of expansion is taking something that is already in one place and pushing it into another place. So that's the part I would start with. If the owner seeks to expand its gaming establishment onto the Revere property, subtext being from Boston to Revere. This was, in good faith, what Revere and Suffolk Downs negotiated. On page 13 of the host community agreement, the owner and the city anticipate that the owner will construct on the Revere property certain improvements to existing racing-related structures, such as barns, maintenance buildings, and surface parking improvements. As Mr. Baker said, parking. Parking is a far cry from the entire facility. I do not see any read of this language which allows for an expansion to equal the entire facility being built there to start as an installation. Page 3. As planned, the project would be constructed within the municipal boundaries of the City of Boston, and no new significant construction is currently proposed on the portion of the property located in Revere. That's on page 3 of the host community agreement. This is what the people were voting on. And I understand there's an open question about whether we're voting on a land use or whether we're voting on the agreement itself. I would argue that given the way that the statute operates, the timeline that we have here, where a vote can't be held until the agreement has been reached and signed off and the election scheduled, that indicates to me that we are voting on the agreement. And I know that's maybe it's not explicit in the text, but I feel like that really follows from just a direct read of the statute. This is the order of things. If it were another way, I could see how maybe we would vote on the land use first and then sit down and negotiate about how that's going to look and what's going to happen. But the fact is that the city made that the developers made these promises to the city and touted these promises to the voters in support of their vote. I want to just very briefly address the issue of the track, which, I'm going to come back probably, oh, actually, I'm sorry, I do want to do one more thing. Mr. Tuttle's comment in September, and I don't want to belabor this, but I'm just going to read it because the actual text of what he said was publicized recently. and I'm just going to read it as it appears.
This is the one that he was referring to
This
that's
is
on the
the
website?
only opportunity of which anyone is aware that anyone had to discuss the possibility, the outside hypothetical, that there might be a split vote. It would be really, really, really hard. If East Boston votes it down, I don't think it gets built in East Boston, but it would be almost impossible for us. But if we have a great deal of support in Revere, I don't think we'd rule out any options, and that's in our letter with citation. I will note that everything in our letter is carefully cited. This was not an affirmative confirmation that they had a plan in the works, that they had anything that they had planned. It was just, this would be almost impossible to do, and we agree. It is actually, we think it is actually literally impossible, but we'll stick with almost impossible. I think that's a pretty good characterization.
I think that says exactly what he says it said, which he sure didn't plan on it.
Sure.
Sure wasn't hoping for it. Sure didn't even really like answering the question.
Sure.
But did, and
Right.
said that it'd be hard to do, very hard to do, but we would keep our options open for Revere only.
That's what he's saying, but that's not a plan.
Pardon?
That's not a plan to build in Revere. That is, if we have to, we'll look at that possibility, and that's what they've done now. After the referendum, they've come back and they've looked at what they can do in Revere. But I do want to address the issue of the track because it is really essential. We do disagree with their read of the phrase gaming establishment for a couple of reasons, but the most important being, this is a precondition of a gaming license. And the language that's already been reviewed, that's in our letter, and that we've already discussed this afternoon. In order to receive a gaming license from this commission, they have to maintain their racing license. In order to get a racing license, they have to maintain a track on the premises, and I would dispute Mr. Baker's read of that. I think on the premises is on the premises of the gaming establishment, but either way, it doesn't really matter because it is an amenity of the gaming establishment, given that this is a precondition. You have to have a track to get a license. That track is in East Boston. We've been making the point for some time since the referendum that they're going to have to move or close the track. Mr. Tuttle actually confirmed that point on November 13th to the Revere Journal. He said there was a very good possibility the track could close or that it would operate as a separate entity with no common access points. He even said it could possibly be moved to another location. It's footnote 16 in our letter. And he said that to the East Boston Times as well. That's a perfectly reasonable position. It can't be in East Boston. Our position at this point is, as Mr. Baker said, parking structures are considered amenities. I don't see why the track wouldn't be. Our position at this point is they can't plant a flower bed in East Boston. They can't plant a flower bed in East Boston. They cannot have anything attached to that casino in East Boston after this vote under the plan that they're proposing now. And that certainly would include the track. And the track is an essential part, given that they cannot get a license without operating a racetrack, as they have told us today. So I'm not sure how you can say that this is a sort of a church-state separation issue. These things are absolutely inextricably linked. I don't see how they could, and again, I'm not in this business, this is a hobby at this point, but I don't understand how they could divest their racing license, which this commission just awarded last week, to a different entity before December 31st, which is what they've suggested they might be able to do. That seems like a pretty tall order. So our position is...
One of the Mr. Bakers said, or somebody said, if we got a license, a gaming license in some other city, in Region C, that under the statute, we would be required to keep the track going.
That's fine.
So are you saying that they couldn't bid in Region C? They have to bid nearby to the track?
Again,
or if it's in Region C, would it be part of the gaming establishment?
I'm thinking through that question. I don't think that, what it says is that if they have a racing license right now, they have to maintain racing on the premises. I would certainly think there's an argument to be made that wherever they have to put it in Region C, that they would have to build a track there. But I think their license right now is tied to Suffolk Downs. And again, this is not my area, but I don't think that they necessarily would be able to get to do that. But, again, I just want to be clear that our position is fairly absolute on this, that they cannot have any portion of this proposal which they're planning to put in before December 31st in East Boston, and that absolutely includes the track. We are neighbors of Suffolk Downs, and we are concerned about the future of the track as well and the people who work there. We don't want it to close. And we understand that a lot of what the proponents were selling was sympathy for the track, and that's certainly understandable. It's a historic institution. But we have to look at what the law says here. And the law, again, as long as this is in East Boston, does not allow for the track to be in East Boston while it is attached to a gaming establishment. We welcome them to maintain the track. We hope that they can preserve it, but it cannot be part of a casino. And actually, I think the Revere Journal put it very well, and I'll just, the Revere Journal actually summarized this better than I could after interviewing Mr. Tuttle. At one point, the casino was touted as being necessary to save the track. Now it appears the track is going to have to be separated in some fashion to save the casino. I can't see how any voter in either of those communities could have ever possibly foreseen that outcome. That's a fairly extreme outcome, that we're going to be sacrificing the track to save the casino, essentially. Commissioners, political campaigns are often compared to chess matches, with all the players visible at any given time and the rules clearly stated and enforced. Those of us who were opposed to a casino at Suffolk Downs played with the limited resources we had available. We marshaled our volunteers, we filed our complete campaign finance reports, we thoroughly analyzed the law and policy on our own time to get our arguments out there, and we got out the vote, even as our opponents were doing the same on the other side of the board in full view of everyone. There was plenty of transparency on both sides. We made our case to the voters honestly and by the rules. I'm proud to have been a part of that. But yet, within hours of the polls closing, the city of Revere has announced that we were no longer playing chess, but that we would all now be playing poker. Under their view of the casino licensing process, it seems that Suffolk Downs now reserves the right to hold all of the cards and let us guess exactly what is in their hand right up until December 31st. That is not how democracy works in this country. It certainly cannot be the process that the legislature envisioned when it emphasized in Section 1, Paragraph 1, the very beginning of the Expanded Gaming Act, that the primary objective of this law is to ensure public confidence in the casino licensing process. That confidence is in jeopardy every day that this commission continues to entertain this applicant's Revere-only proposal. Commissioners, there are places around the globe today in which citizens go to the polls and are told the next day that they actually voted for something other than what was on the ballot. I am not a citizen of one of those countries. On behalf of myself, No Easty Casino, and the voters of East Boston, we respectfully request that you grant no further consideration to anything filed by this applicant. Thank you.
Questions?
No, I think for me, they've been all answered. Thank you.
I would again just request you take a look at our letter, because I think it says a lot better than I
Well,
could.
I was going to say, if you have a 5-page letter, we should see that, and I have.
Certainly.
Is this it?
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have-
And I think we do have a couple of extra copies. If you
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me just think, I just wanted trying to think about this. So on the question of, so your position is that the Revere host community agreement and its summary do not anticipate this eventuality.
In the
Forget
least.
whatever East Boston thought.
Right.
There are two different questions here.
Sure.
Or there can be two different questions. So you believe that this, as you read this language, this does not anticipate and thus not permit this eventuality.
This is not what the city of Revere and Suffolk Downs
It's not
negotiated.
what?
It's not what they negotiated in good faith. And I've read the host community agreement several times. I've read this ballot language, and I just think it's an extreme stretch to say that when you're talking about expanding a gaming facility, that what you actually meant was installing it wholesale with nothing in East Boston, because everything in this host community agreement is predicated on something that's in East Boston.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you for your time.
And I believe there were representatives of people in favor of the new proposal in Revere. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Gary Ferragamo. I'm a Revere resident and a Revere business owner. I have been supporting the Suffolk Downs development since day one. As I'm sure everybody knows, there's no perfect fit or perfect development for any location ever. There's always people in favor, there's always people not in favor. I think the goal is to try to achieve happiness amongst the masses and go with what the majority of people would like. I'm a little confused to get off subject for a moment, if East Boston voted no and Revere voted yes, and Revere is proposing we can do it on our own, how could that hurt East Boston? It's just me. I'm funny that way. I believe in my mayor. I believe in our city councilors. I believe in progress, and I believe in more jobs at this time. And I think all of these wonderful things can and will happen with this development. So as a Revere resident and business owner, I am all in favor of this project.
Good afternoon,
Thank you.
guys.
Good afternoon.
First of all, thank you for hearing us. Thank you for hearing Suffolk Downs. And most of all, on a personal, thank you guys. I know you guys have a tough job, and there are a lot of us that appreciate that. My name is Joe Tedesca. I'm an East Boston resident. I've born and raised in East Boston. For 40 years, I've lived within a mile of the racetrack. On November 5th, I was extremely disappointed in the vote. I thought it would have been very beneficial to our community. But I sit here in front of you today because I continue to support Suffolk Downs and a Revere-only project. Although it may not be as lucrative, I still think there are many benefits to our community. Jobs created, jobs preserved, road improvements, and revenues to the city. On a personal note, I don't want to see Suffolk Downs gone. It's been a part of my life. Like I said, I've always lived within a mile of the racetrack. My brother owns a business right outside of Suffolk Downs entrance, right next to the train station, that my father started 60 years ago. And like I said, personally, I would hate to see that go. I would hate to see an alternative development there. And like Gary said, if Revere voted yes, I think that if you guys approve a gaming license, they should get it. And just on another quick note, I've been involved with the community through this entire process for over a year and a half. I've been to every East Boston community meeting, and Mr. Tuttle did on numerous occasions say that if one voted yes, one voted no, that it would be possible. It would be hard, but it would be possible. So I just want to be a character witness to say that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Stephen Ciambelli. I voted yes for this. I grew up pretty close to Suffolk Downs in the Beachmont area. You know, when I personally turned over the ballot and read it, to me, the referendum clearly stated off of Winthrop Ave. So I just assumed it's a large mass of land that it really could go anywhere. So I felt like, you know, that possibility was there when I voted yes. I think, you know, we should feel lucky to get this because of the jobs and the revenue stream that it can bring to the area. I feel personally lucky if we get this, and I want to commend Suffolk Downs for all the hard work that they put into this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, I guess, for Gary. Assuming, Stephen, you're in Revere. Gary, you're from Revere. What was your expectation or understanding the day you went to the polls?
There was discussion for the last 6 months or so on the strength of Revere versus East Boston. And people, I own a restaurant in Revere, so people come in and talk, and a lot of the Revere residents were excited about it, and they kept saying things along the lines of, why can't we just do Revere only? Which I thought was interesting. I had the same thoughts. Overall, the majority of people that I know and speak with think it's an amazing opportunity for our city right now. It's like a dream. A $1 billion development done correctly with your guidance, and if they meet every criteria of what you want them to meet, I think it's just the greatest thing we can hope for at this time.
Are you also, excuse me, are you,
Mr. Chairman, we have an additional person who would like to speak if you would be willing to recognize them.
all right, this will have to be the last because we're getting late here.
Hi, my name is Mary Berninger. I live in East Boston, and I'm a homeowner, and I am raising my family there and have lived there for this stretch of time for 30 years. And my husband's family and my family have always lived in East Boston, so we have quite a vested interest. I support the Revere-only casino now, although I was a supporter of an East Boston and Revere, you know, joint project, if you will. And as others have said, I think it was a missed opportunity for East Boston, but I respect the voters, and we must go forward. But I just wanted to come and say that Suffolk Downs has been a good neighbor in the community, both communities. They have been huge supporters of the nonprofits in our communities that give an awful lot of services to children, seniors, and people who, need outreach. And Suffolk Downs has always been there, has never said no to any request that I have known to be given to them. I view this whole situation as a regional development concern. And I think there are more economic positives for having a license in that region than there are negatives. The close proximity to the city will allow the city's marketing ability to advance their agenda. Mitigation measures for transportation improvements will still benefit the region, 1A, Route 1, and 16. With regard to jobs, I have a very hard time embracing anything that will sever jobs for anybody. Those jobs at the racetrack now, the ones that will be added later with regard to the casino, will only help many families to buy homes, pay their their rents if they're tenants, and put food on the table. And I know I heard in the testimony with the prior group that sat here and said that they didn't want to see jobs lost, and I would take exception to that because on more than one occasion, some of the No Eastie Casino supporters have, in a very cavalier manner, said, well, that's all right if those jobs are gone because when one door closes, another door opens. Some of those individuals who have jobs right now are in a position that they would not be able to reinvent themselves for employers going forward. They've been at the track for an awful long time. They may be finding it very difficult to envision themselves having to be retrained, go back to school, all those kinds of things, and that's where they find their employment opportunity to provide for their families. So I found that very offensive when that was told to me during the campaign.
We're going to have to.
Yeah.
We're going to have to stop.
So I just
appreciate
wanted
that,
to
but-
tell you that.
Okay. Well, thank
you.
But I think we've got the drift. But
Yep.
thank you. We appreciate a representation of Revere as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I had said we could have one or two spokespersons. We've had 4, and I think that's plenty.
You're easy to talk to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, where are we? I find, I think it's a tough one. I mean, this is one of these situations where trying to, well, first trying to figure out what's fair is incredibly difficult. I do think that a really seminal question, maybe the question, and maybe the only question, is whether this document, the HCA, the referendum, the summary and the referendum, did anticipate this in good faith. And I actually find the quote from Mr. Tuttle is indicative that he clearly did have it in the back of his mind and clearly was keeping his options open. I can imagine that they had no interest in talking about that, but it sounded like if pressed, he did say that we would have to, we're keeping our options open, we'd have to. I would assume if he had that in the back of his mind, that he and his team would be smart enough to make sure that the host community agreement would anticipate that, and that therefore their explanation, I mean, expand does mean expand, it doesn't mean replace, and I find that troubling. But if it was in his mind as an option, then it's hard not to take the 2 lawyers at their word, unless they're lying to his bald face, that they were trying to draft a document that would accommodate this possibility.
I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, that what one or both of the people who involved in the contract drafting had in the back of their minds is really dispositive for the reasons that I discussed with one of the witnesses here, and that is the people had to read this thing, and we're supposed to read it, and we're supposed to factor a reasonable reading of what was in there into their ultimate vote. For me, this is, like for all of us, really difficult. But it seems to me that the outcome depends on a careful reading of both host community agreements, ballot summaries, and ballot summaries. And number one, laying that against a careful reading and thought about the statutory requirements, and then seeing, just out of an abundance of caution, what the proposal actually is in concrete terms. And I think this is a really, as we all know, this is an important, critically important question and vote and decision that we're going to have to make. And I think we should have all of those parts in hand before we make any final decision. Now, that means that we prolong the period of uncertainty. It means that the good people who we heard testify here about wanting this to be over so they can move on to other things are not going to have it over right now if we do that. But it does mean that the economic benefits, the pros and the cons will get the kind of careful consideration we usually give to matters before we make a final decision. So I would very much favor that kind of deliberate approach.
What do we learn from the actual application itself that we don't know now?
We learn the configuration. We learn whether there is truly a separation between the track and the gaming facility. We learn and see things that probably they haven't thought about now, and we certainly haven't thought about. And I expressly stated that that's an excess of caution. We may not learn a lot from that.
Right.
But we at least have before us a graphic depiction of the separation that Mr. Baker told us will clearly occur here that allows them to say that the gaming establishment and the track are not connected. We still have the statutory piece because on the premises of what piece is there? So it may be that we can shortstop that, but it seems to me that, not that we can shortstop, but that ultimately looking at the diagram may not be dispositive. In fact, it probably won't be. But at least we've gone to that last step and taken a look at that before we make the final decision.
I'm just playing this out. I have not
Yeah, no, I
a position at this point.
understand.
That would be saying there is the possibility that they could go forward here. That we would be saying that yes, it is within the realm of the possible that this could be acceptable.
Well, I would not. I think if we leave this meeting today with a plan to wait, we have not committed ourselves to the fact that it's possible or impossible. We just need to look more closely at the language of the documents and the language of the statute and lay the two together. We haven't said it's possible to go forward or it's impossible to go forward. And that's really what I would like to leave this meeting today with, that kind of a non-decision. Typically, this is not what we do.
Yeah, right.
And
You mean not make decisions?
not make decisions, and purposely not make decisions, and purposely leave things up in the air. And that has its own drawbacks and its own restlessness among the voters. It creates its own restlessness among the voters and the watchers and the onlookers on both sides, on all sides. We don't make a decision today, and we don't say it's not possible, then the Suffolk folks go forward with something that may, in fact, prove to be impossible. If conversely, we keep the people who are on watch on the alert, but I think it's the only way I'd feel comfortable ending the day.
Either,
I would agree with that. I think there's a number of questions in the legal realm that we really need to think about and analyze and hear from. Amenity, gaming establishment, premises, and that's just to start. And how all of those intersect with an actual proposal. I think it's worthwhile, waiting a little longer. December 31st will be here before we know it.
yeah.
To see what we get.
To reinforce the point, Ms. Myers, I think it was, said that Senator Petrocelli had said something characterizing what the legislature meant. I don't remember that, but I'd like to find out what she was talking about. And, I mean, there may be some legislative intent issues here too. I'm not sure how that cuts. So I would agree. I wasn't sure about waiting until the application is done, but I think I do agree with you that this was such a tough case that to be fair to everybody, somebody's going to be very unhappy here. And this is a 51-49 question at best, and we ought to have all of the information we can possibly get to. So I tend to think but it was only that. I definitely wouldn't make a decision today. I think we'd have to do a lot of real hard looking, because clearly the law is going to be the threshold here.
I agree that I would like to hear from our legal staff on some of those key points about the establishment, but I'm not sure. So we'd wait for the application to come in and then make a decision at that point, that you can either go on and be part of the evaluation process or you can't? Is that, I just wasn't sure.
That would be my ideal outcome.
So you would have a threshold issue that no other applicant has, and that is, will we accept your application?
Yes.
I understand the reasons for that, but I'm not sure. There's so much that goes into that application, all the permitting and all of the hoops, and I just wonder if we're being fair.
Well, they requested that.
Right.
They said, don't make a decision now, let us make it. I know what you're saying. People have spent tons of money, never mind folks who are volunteering their time. The other side is putting in tons of money and tons of energy, but they asked us to do that. They said, wait and let us show you so you can make an informed decision.
Plus, I'll remind ourselves that the time where the certification of the vote, for example, the deadline for that is the deadline for our RFA 2. So there's a number of requirements of the application that only come until RFA 2. It was only the investigatory piece that we bifurcated into RFA 1. So in many ways, we don't have yet an application, and that was by design. And there's many concepts that will be presented, really, at that time.
But I think implicitly they might, I'm sure this is not cast in stone, but implicitly the applicant has suggested, explicitly actually, that they do think we have the authority to stop the process now if we wanted to. I mean, I'm not holding them to that, but they did say that, we hope you will make the decision to let us go forward.
Right.
So I think we could sort of, go one step at a time. I think we would like to see as thoughtful research as we can possibly get. I'd like to read all of the 5 pages of the Noisi Casino letter, think about whatever we can learn as far as legislative, and see where we're at. And if that tells us something, maybe we decide at that point to make a different decision, or maybe we decide to go ahead and wait, as Commissioner McHugh was saying.
I would keep open the possibility that in this intervening time period between now and December 31st, that if Suffolk and the city of Revere feel the need to come back and update us on anything new that develops, that we should give them that opportunity as opposed to waiting until the application.
if they want to update us on their request that we need.
Update us
Let the
on
process go forward.
any of their design, any of their proposal. We know, they're, at this point, minus an operator. I think any of those key updates would be helpful, potentially in advance of the application date.
But I think we have to be careful not, what we're talking about is, my original question was, can they do this? And we're going to say, we're not sure yet. But we don't want to give them a chance to lobby the commission for features of their proposal that the other bidders aren't going to get. So, yes, we need to hear who the new operator is. That's a requisite, and Mr. Cameron may have pointed out that a deadline has already slipped on part of that. But if they ask, we can certainly entertain it, but I don't want to give them a chance to come in and, and give us a sales pitch on their proposal that the other folks don't get.
The can we do it can they do the question still is the predominant question.
Right.
And that's the only one that's before us.
That's the way I would characterize it as well. Are we all comfortable with that? Are we? So what we'll do is do the research we can get our arms around as quickly as we possibly can, and consider that carefully, and then see where we're at with, I think, sort of leaning towards waiting for the full proposal, but not absolutely there yet. I don't think we need to vote. We need to vote, yeah. Okay, that's where we are, wherever that is.
Well, our employment of lawyers continues.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all the law firms, except for the folks who are volunteering, and I am sensitive to the fact that this isn't just this debate. This happens in debate after debate after debate, where one side has a lot of money and the other doesn't, and we're not unsympathetic. I mean, we're not unaware of that. We are, and particularly for people who have to work for a living, and when they put in volunteer time, don't get paid for it. That's a very big sacrifice, and we understand that. And the whole issue, we won't forget, of community and surrounding community and sort of regional support will become an issue as we make our final decisions. We've talked about that all along, that community support, community relationships are going to be relevant to us even after we have accepted applications and are making our decisions. Okay, I think we have one other item, and then we're done.
I would like to go back and get a cup of water.
All right, we will have a quick break. Okay, I think we are ready. Before we get on to this topic, I'm going to make one little quick ad lib here. There was a guest who had been here since early this morning who thought she was going to have an opportunity to speak. We thought we had communicated that. It got lost in communication. And because she's been here so long, I do want to ask her to come forward. So if one of you could maybe use this mic. I don't know your last name, but Angie, you're welcome to come speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry this took so long.
Appreciate you allowing me to provide my comments here in the form of a quick letter. Dear Massachusetts Gaming Commission, after reading about Suffolk Downs, Sterling Suffolk Racetrack, official notification to the Commission on a Revere-only casino plan, I'm wondering how is it possible that Suffolk Downs or the Commission can even consider this new plan. The host community agreements for East Boston and Revere were based upon a partnership between Suffolk Downs and Caesars Entertainment to build a Caesars brand and styled $1 billion resort destination casino. Caesars did not pass the background check, and the dissolution of that partnership between Suffolk Downs and Caesars should have caused the Commission to deem Suffolk Downs unsuitable, but it didn't. Suffolk Downs barely passed the adjudicatory hearing with the decision of suitability, albeit conditional, even though the commissioners and the Investigations and Enforcement Bureau appeared to have grave reservations on the plan that they presented. There was a referendum vote that, according to the expanded gaming law establishing gaming in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that is Mass General Laws, Chapter 194 of the Acts of 2011, specifically from page 28, Chapter 23K, Section 15, Clause 13, provided in part that if the ballot question is voted in the negative, the applicant should not submit a new request to the governing body within 180 days of the last election, and provided further that the new request shall be accompanied by an agreement between the applicant and host community signed after the previous election, provided further that if a proposed gaming establishment is situated in 2 or more cities or towns, the applicant shall execute an agreement with each host community or a joint agreement with both communities and receive a certified and binding vote on a ballot question at an election held in each host community in favor of such a license. The vote happened, and the result, as you know, in East Boston was a negative vote. That means that this plan is no more. There are millions of dollars at stake for the host community, so it's easy to understand why Revere's Mayor Rizzo is salivating to proceed with the new plan. But he does not and should not speak for the City of Revere's residents. According to the gaming law, the process must begin anew for Suffolk Downs to be reconsidered for a gaming license, and that cannot happen before December 31st, 2013's deadline that was established, unless laws are broken and/or rules bent. For East Boston residents, we fought long and hard to win a no casino vote. It is in bad faith that Suffolk Downs is trying to work around the referendum, gaming law, and host community agreements in order to have their way. This is not fair, and I hope the Commission will see Suffolk Downs' new effort for what it is, sour grapes. Further, I hope the Commission disqualifies Suffolk Downs as an applicant in issuance of this round of gaming licenses. Suffolk Downs should not be allowed to reapply for a gaming license until it has lawfully satisfied the established process. Please follow the law in doing your job. Thank you, unless you have some questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We're going to do our best.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for waiting. Yeah, thanks for waiting. Okay, Director Jill.
Good afternoon, Chairman Crosby, Commissioners. As you know, it's in the best, can you hear me? Yeah. It's in the best interest of the Commonwealth and the applicant to ensure labor harmony during construction and operations of the casino. At the last commission meeting, Brian Lang of Unite Here Local 26 asked the Mass Gaming Commission for time to give his recommendations for ensuring labor harmony during operations. The commission indicated that you were interested in hearing other perspectives. And following that meeting, I was contacted by Barry Hawk, UAW Mass Gaming Director.
Which one is Barry?
A regular at our meetings. We have Julie Kushner, who's a regional director of UAW, and we also have some special guests from out of town who have agreed to give you their testimony. They've agreed to be brief. They knew that you had a full day, but I'd like to just briefly introduce them. Ernestine Dawkins is a table games dealer at Tropicana Casino in Atlantic City, and she's also president of UAW Local 8888. Okay. Jim Laurie is a poker dealer at Horseshoe Cleveland, 11 years as a dealer and member of the bargaining committee. And Denise Gladow is a table games dealer for 17 years at Foxwoods Resort Casino. And she's the financial secretary of UAW Local 2121. I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
Great. Well, first of all, Chairman Crosby and all of the commissioners, we really appreciate you taking the time to hear from our members. I want to sort of give you a quick overview. I know you heard from Brian Lang, and much of everything he says we agree with in terms of labor harmony agreements, the purpose, the importance of those agreements to the Commonwealth to having good jobs. We believe that good jobs don't just happen, that you have to make them good jobs, and that the labor movement and unions have been doing this for decades and decades. And in fact, still today, and I started doing this work in 1977, still today, the statistics show that union jobs pay higher wages and better compensation than other non-union similar jobs. And in fact, today, it's 27% higher for unionized workers. So we think that there's really good
Is that
evidence.
in the gaming industry? Are you
That's
referring to?
nationally.
Anywhere, in anything.
That's not specific to gaming, and I don't know if they have a statistic, but it's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We could certainly find out if they often do go by sector as well. We can look at that.
That'd be
But we believe that labor harmony agreements will make it possible for workers to organize. So today, what we did was we brought to you some dealers who have had very different experiences. Ernestine, who organized in Atlantic City, will describe her experience where there was no labor harmony agreement. Jim will talk about the Ohio organizing where they have labor harmony and how different it was. And then Denise is here from Foxwoods, and she'll be able to talk a little bit about the importance of a union contract. My experience within gaming, I started in 2007 working with the Foxwoods dealers in their efforts to form a union. The UAW represents nearly 10,000 dealers nationwide. In this region, Connecticut, Rhode Island, we have the Newport Grand operation, but also in Atlantic City, Michigan, New Jersey, Indiana, Ohio, and now recently the Flamingo dealers in Las Vegas have just organized with the UAW. So this is an area where we've developed some expertise and representation and are interested in expanding. So I think, we'll take questions. I know that maybe it would be helpful just to go over the components before you hear from Ernestine and Jim. Just to remind you, I know you've heard this from Brian Lang, but the first component of a labor harmony agreement, the employer agrees to remain neutral and not to try and influence the vote of any individual employee. They provide access to the union, to the workforce, so that there's opportunity to explain and answer questions about what unionization means. The union is provided with contact information so that we can also be in a position to talk to folks away from work where they might be more comfortable to spend more extended time asking their questions. We typically, in the labor harmony agreement, the employer and the union meet together with the workforce so that the employer in front of everyone can say, we are not going to try and influence your vote. And in particularly today's time, that's really important because most people are afraid that their employer is really deep down anti-union and that fearful that it could impact their future employment if they participate in a union campaign. Then there's a process to recognize the union upon show of majority support. And then finally, one of the critical pieces is that if you can't reach an agreement, that there's a fair process, an arbitration process to negotiate really the first contract, which replaces disruptions and strikes with a fair process that both parties agreed to abide by in the end with a neutral arbitrator. So those are the elements of a labor harmony agreement, and we think they're critical. We will provide you with a more detailed analysis of that, especially since so many of the degree to which the specifics are important in labor harmony agreements, I can't underscore enough. Having a timely process, making sure that it's enforceable in the courts or within an arbitration process. There's lots of elements that make this real, that don't make it just empty words on a piece of paper. But having said enough here, let me introduce Ernestine, who will tell you about her experience.
Good afternoon. My name's Ernestine Dawkins. I've been a dealer for over 30 years, currently 25 years at Tropicana. I'm the president of Orva Local. Excuse me, I'm kind of nervous. And just to say, it took a long time just to get a union in Atlantic City. We had 3 attempts over 20 years. In 2007, we won our election. It took us like a half a year to get cards collected. And once we had the cards collected, it took over 3 years to get a contract. The company would not bargain with us in good faith. They took a lot of things away from us that they had in their handbook, which they're still taking things away at the moment. And they just use tactics, scare tactics against, race against race, different nationalities against different nationalities, which we are a family now, which they didn't understand after working 25 years together. No matter what nationality you come from, we're a family. And we stuck together and we won like 90% of the vote. And it's just to show you, if we had something that they're trying to get here, it would have been much easier for us. and they're still having their little tactics. You know, we have supervisors talking against the union, which I don't understand. You know, it makes it better for the workers. They promised us good jobs. Once they came and established themselves, they're just taken away. They just keep taking, and taking. And we want them to make money just like we want to make money. We just want to be treated fairly. Now, we had negotiations like they trying to get in Boston. It would have been much easier for us.
Our statute, somebody remind me,
Yeah,
calls for labor harmony
Yes.
agreements, not in the application, but by the time of operation. What is our?
No,
does
no,
anyone know?
one of the requirements of the, one of the prerequisites of the application
Of the
is,
application.
of the application.
Okay.
So we'll see this in phase 2.
Okay.
Is that they present to us plans for ensuring labor harmony. Now, so that's something, that's a question in our RFA, that's, I believe, under the mitigation, it may be under the.
It's under the economic development section.
Economic development sections, I'm sorry. Now, we'll get to this, but, because I've been learning a lot about these kinds of things recently. Those plans can vary. Somebody, an applicant can come in with any number of plans, with an executed labor harmony agreement. Even an executed labor harmony agreement may differ from others. And I think that's very important for us to really understand and think about, relative to whether they can be enforced and how they get implemented. I think this notion of neutrality, which is a question I had for you, Ms. Kirshner, is critical. Somebody presenting, say, a union may not necessarily mean that they are neutral. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the statement of the employer that they will be neutral and that they will abide by the results of the democratic choice of the workers is really critical because, today there's been a history in the United States of employers fighting unions that everyone is aware of, especially today. And so I think that unless there's a positive statement of neutrality, I think that you will find that workers in the back of their head are going to be afraid to express their own view. I know that where we have had experience, which like you'll hear from Jim, where we've had experience with labor harmony agreements and people feel comfortable, we've been almost 100% successful. The workers do choose to unionize under those circumstances. And it's not that hard to imagine that if you have a choice between having your own organization in dealing with the employer or having to be on your own, most workers will pick an organization and see the value in it. But it is entirely dependent on feeling that there won't be retaliation if they form a union. And that's where the neutrality becomes so important. And the other piece of that is making sure that these neutrality labor harmony agreements cover all the non-supervisory employees. Because there are occasions you might see a neutrality agreement that only covers a certain classifications. Historically, dealers were not organized into unions. It's only in the last decade that started happening. And so some of the major developers are reluctant to include dealers as a classification in neutrality agreements. And so that would be very critical because also the dealers are going to be the major part of the workforce. There are more dealers in casinos than any other single classification. I'm sorry.
This may not be something on which you can comment, but if you can, I'd welcome a comment about the SEIU case that was recently argued in the Supreme Court.
The Mulhall case?
Yeah, and its impact on labor harmony agreements and their legality.
I'm not a lawyer or an expert. However, I follow these things pretty closely. And our UAW has been involved in labor harmony agreements in several different industries. So in addition to casinos and gaming industry, certainly in manufacturing, there's some of the biggest cases that have gone before the Supreme Court in the past have been UAW cases in the supplier industry to the auto industry. And essentially that Supreme Court will decide whether, they heard the case about a week ago, whether labor labor harmony agreements are a thing of value.
Right.
And in engaging in the negotiations with the employer, the exchange of something of value is what's being questioned.
Right.
You know, we don't know how how that will fall out. I don't think it's gonna, the main issue that's being questioned there is the amount of money that one union spent engaging in support of a developer. And so it was a question of the amount of money was, you know, significant, like $500,000 or more. And I don't think we see in Massachusetts any union being in a position where we've engaged in that way. So I don't think that the Supreme Court decision will impact labor harmony agreements, as the facts are going to be so different here in Massachusetts.
Quick data point. Ernestine talked about the card collection before having an election. Are the federal rules now changed that it's the collection of the cards and not ultimately an election?
Under federal law, if you're allowed to collect cards, and an employer is allowed to agree to majority authorization through the collection of cards, but they're not required to. So an employer can say, instead of checking cards, we want you to go through an NLRB election.
Okay.
And so most of the labor harmony agreements call for card check, is what they call it, but majority authorization on cards, as opposed to an election. And that is legal, but not required under federal law.
Okay. And it would be a negotiating point of a labor harmony agreement, I take it then?
It would be, although I would say that probably 90% or more include card check as opposed to an election.
Right.
So maybe Jim could.
Ernestine, you had an election in Atlantic City?
Yes.
Right? And can you describe what that was like?
Well, we had like 90% of the vote.
Right.
When we started collecting cards, we had 1,000 dealers.
Yes.
So 90% of the dealers wanted the union. Currently, we have 505 dealers. And the majority, I'm saying it's almost 50-50 part-time. And the majority was full-time back in '07 when we voted the union in.
But Ernestine, you might want to share, I know, because I was working with, even though it was a different region of the UAW, I was working with you all. During that election period, that's when it becomes it can be extremely tense. And the employer, I think, tried to really.
Well, they had every employee come in 2 hours early. We had to watch videos, go to classes, to saying how the union was not good for the workers at the time, which in the last 20 years, we had tried to attempt to get unions. After 30 years, we knew better. We needed somebody, a group to support us, to back us, to keep the things that we wanted that they promised us when they first came in, and we voted them in 1978. And I was about 17 then. I started dealing at the age of 19, and I'm still dealing.
What do you deal?
Craps, roulette, blackjack.
You do all those?
Yes.
How do you follow all that stuff that goes on the craps table?
It's habit. It's habit.
She's
I
a
can go
genius.
into the bank and touch the money, and my hands go like this. That's just clearing my hands for the camera. Some things is just automatic with you. You're just like a robot. Once you do it for so long, it comes to you.
Yeah,
And
but
how long have
don't
you-
let her fool you. She's a little bit of a genius, too, to be able to remember all that
Oh,
stuff.
of course. I mean, that's the most
1978?
complicated.
Yes,
So you were one of the
craps
first?
is- yeah, I love
You were at the
craps.
beginning, very beginning.
Yes.
Atlantic Community College or a different
I
training?
went to Stockland State for a couple of years,
Okay.
and then I trained in Pleasantville.
Okay,
For
excellent.
like 3 months for the course.
From New Jersey.
I know. I knew that. They told me that. State trooper.
So maybe Jim could explain what it's like when you have a
Much
labor
easier
har-
than anything anybody else went through. I'm Jim Larry from Horseshoe, Cleveland. I have 9.5 years Las Vegas experience. Moved away from Ohio because there was no gaming like here in Massachusetts. But it always interested me, enjoyed it. And when I found out that Ohio got it passed and they were going to open a casino in Cleveland, it allowed me to come home. I'm an only child, be able to come home, be with my parents, and 5 children, my wife. And so it's been a wonderful thing to be able to come back. I am a day one dealer at Horseshoe. Opened May 16th of 2012, my wife, also a dealer, blackjack and table games. So it really has a lot to do with my family personally. When I came back, I saw things in the casino that just didn't seem agree with me and my family and what I was used to and things. They would schedule us. We didn't have a set schedule. Like I could be 10 a.m. today, 2 p.m. tomorrow, noon the next day. I guess you get what I'm saying. And when you have a family and you have a life, you need a quality of life. You know, what time can dinner be with children, soccer games, baseball games, after school, you know, care and all these things. And so the union, when I started looking into things, and because we had a labor agreement, it was so much easier for me because I could get the answers that I needed. They had a table set up in the EDR. There was information. You know, if I needed, I could just have question and answer, like, well, how could you help me with like the scheduling? Or my pay was very low in that region. I started looking at Google and stuff, and I knew what I made in Las Vegas, and just different things like that. I also, you know, we stand for 8 hours a day, and when we first opened the casino, like what happened here in Boston, you're gonna work 10, 12, 14-hour days because it's overwhelming. People are so happy. Well, when you're standing on, you know, just a concrete floor with carpeting, and there's no anti-fatigue mats, believe me, your back, your knees, your legs, they wasn't like a concern for them when I would bring it up myself, especially the scheduling issues. So when I informed myself and got the information that the union could really help, and believe me, they really have, it was a no-brainer for myself, my family, my coworkers. It only took 2 months for us to organize. We organized at like 70%, and since I was voted into, I'm in the process of negotiating our first contract right now. So the non-union dealers at that time, or people who were against the union, now walk up and down the hallways and thank me and shake my hand. Thank you for the work you're doing. I didn't see it. You know, keep doing what you're doing. I have about 350 of the 550 dealers that follow me on Facebook on what's going on. The labor harmony agreement, absolutely. I'm here to really help the workers in Massachusetts because it's been overwhelming what I've seen in Cleveland. I was also down in Cincinnati and was able to help organize. I was actually one of the guys that sat at the table in the EDR, and the dealers were so, just thanked me so much for taking the time to come down because I could speak their language. PTO, working 60-20s or 80-20s, and just all the things that they're gonna face on a daily basis and what I could do in Cleveland and how the union could help them in Cincinnati. So not only now Cincinnati, Toledo, Columbus have all joined on, all had labor agreement issues. The only thing I made a note for that would be important too would be in Cleveland, because this is so new, the HR department put up about a 3 or 4 page letter that explained what neutrality was and everything like that, because truly I can understand what they probably went through in Atlantic City. We have so many cameras in the casino and everything. And even though we understood what neutrality was, people were still afraid to walk up and talk to a union person, even down in Cincinnati when they knew we were sisters. And I was down there. I was invited by the casino to help and be there, but they were still afraid because the camera's on them at all times. If they would talk to me, would there be some kind of retaliation? There were a couple supervisors that spoke out against the union, both places, Cleveland and when I was in Cincinnati. We wrote up a report. We were able to take it to the HR department. It stopped immediately. It put people very easy. And even with labor harmony agreements, she probably doesn't know I brought this, but there's a mailing that went out to everybody. They give you the paper where everybody's classification, their address, and everything like that. So inside was a card. So it went to their home because people were sometimes afraid to take one, and we had neutrality once again. So the card was inside. They could just fill it out and mail it directly in. So that was a big help too, very important. So any questions or anything, you know, thank you for your time.
Ohio is obviously new in the gaming jurisdictions. Was there anything in the, I mean, they passed casino gaming by referendum, but was there anything in the statute or anything in the regulations that spoke to how the operator needed to kind of respond to
That I
organizing
wouldn't know. It
activity?
seemed like they had an agreement prior. Again, I came in April of 2012. The casino opened in May.
Right.
I came right before the casino opened. I was hired to move back, and they already had that agreement prior to the casino opening with the union to be there and be able to be inside. And,
Sure.
And that's why the HR department had the paper up. And down in Cincinnati, let me mention, they've even gone a step further. The GM of Cincinnati, the GM of the Horseshoe, had a hour-long session about 6 different times in a 24-hour period because of the different start times, where he would stand up in a room like this, and I was present. He would go first, and he would say, I'm Kevin Klein, GM of, Horseshoe here. We want our workers to know that you have a right to inform yourself, get the education that you need, and see if the union is something that you'd be interested in. That's coming from me. He'd leave the room, and then at that time, like I was there with some other members, and we could say, this is, any questions that we can answer for you, this is what's happening up in Cleveland, and this is why I got involved personally, and that was a big help too, that we didn't even have in Cleveland, so it's even moved forward like that.
So the labor harmony agreement there in Ohio allowed, and they usually allow entrance into the premises by union representatives that are not current employees.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
We wore badges. You get a visitor's badge. You are only allowed in the employee dining room. You have a table set up, and it's pretty much manned around the clock because the casino industry is 24/7, 365 days a year, and that way any shift can come up and talk and get the information that they need.
And my understanding in Ohio is that it was a different process than's going on here in the Commonwealth. And the unions, particularly UAW, we have a very significant membership in Ohio that live in Ohio, and we do a lot of political action. So we partnered with the developers to and had labor harmony agreements before the referendum took place. So I don't believe it's part of the statute per se, but I think it was part of the understanding that with the developers that and as I said, the agreements were enforceable. They were, they were good, strong labor harmony agreements, so that we partnered going into it.
Now, perhaps the Ohio instance might be a good illustration, but I'm trying to understand what different job classifications. You keep mentioning the dealers, obviously, that's your target. But we've heard from Brian Lang about the service and workers, and I believe they also represent food and beverage, for example.
Right.
How does that process come to fruition?
I think it's different.
Different unions accessing at different times?
It's different in different places. In Michigan, we partnered with Unite Here. Again, we had a very strong membership base in Michigan, and Unite Here approached us and said, why don't we partner to pass the ordinance in Detroit that allowed for the casino gambling. And so in that instance, there's different partnerships of different unions. But you're correct, there's the classifications even go as broadly as there's engineering, there's AC, the AC folks that manage the ventilation systems. In Foxwoods, it didn't start out with labor harmony, and it was a more difficult process, but through organizing, and Denise will tell you about that, and through the process of collective bargaining, actually management began to see the value in having union relationships. So some of the other 2 units that followed us, like the food and beverage and engineering, were actually organized under labor harmony agreements so that they had a much easier time in organizing. So, it's really different in different places, but hopefully you'd find that there would be ways in which the unions would work together in coalition to make it an easier process here in Massachusetts.
So is it fair to say that one labor harmony agreement could be struck with partnerships or not, or does an applicant need multiple labor harmony agreements?
Any labor harmony agreement that is reached with any particular union under the law has to be applied equally to any union.
To any union.
So even if you haven't signed on to that agreement, they have to offer
They
the
all
same.
have to mirror each other.
So if they give access to one union, they have to give access to every union, so there can't be any discrimination in that way. However, clearly, I think what works best is when unions get together and figure out how do we do this together. So in Jim's situation, there's a gaming council, and that's true in Michigan as well. The bargaining's done with all the unions together at the same bargaining table. In Atlantic City, they don't have a council, so as I mentioned, the dealer classification is only a recent organizing, and so in the last 10 years, so we were not at the table with the food and beverage and hospitality workers and the other types of workers that have been organized there for decades. But I know at Foxwoods we don't have a council, but we really coordinate well with the other unions there, so that we're like on the same page about some of the universal conditions like healthcare and 401ks and those kinds of things, so that we're not bargaining against each other, but supporting each other. And Denise can tell you a little bit about that if you'd like to hear from her.
Hi, I'm Denise Gladue. I'm a dual rate dealer at Foxwoods. I've been there 19 years, but 17 as a dealer. I started in another department. Currently, I'm on leave from my dealing job because I'm the full-time financial secretary for our union. My daughter is also a dealer at Foxwoods, and I was hired there in 1994. In 2007 and 2008, we were organizing. We voted our union in, and after a long campaign, they decided to recognize our union. And having a collective bargaining rights at Foxwoods has really made a difference for all of us. It didn't just make a difference for our dealers, because what they did is the things we won in our contract, they passed on to the other departments that didn't have contract, like 401k and things like that. So it made a big difference to everyone, not just us. With a collective bargaining agreement and rights, we are able to pick bargaining members to bargain, elect our own bargaining committee. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. We let management know what our main priorities are, what's important to us. We have binding arbitration for our contract negotiations so that, there is an end in sight. We can't bargain forever, We've gotten pay increases every year we've had a contract, which is really good in this economy. The dealers' tips, along with their base pay, average over $20 an hour. So there's a lot, we make a fair wage.
Tips plus base pay
Yeah.
averages $20 an hour.
Oh, yeah, over 20.
Are they pooled tips?
Yes, they are. Most of our dealers are full-time and have full benefits. Our tips are, we get to decide how they're pooled, not management, because they are our money. We also have a joint labor management committee, health and safety committee, that we work on ergonomics and on-the-job safety together to, improve injuries. And with a contract, we want Foxwoods to be successful because both of us, the workers and the company make money. That's one of our main priorities.
The tip issue maybe is a good one to expand on a little bit, because at Foxwoods, they've always had a pool for all the tips. But at some point, and that included poker and the table games. However, poker, nationally, typically, they keep their own tips. And the poker dealers wanted to keep their own tips, and previous to the union, there was never any ability for them to make that change. And so under the union contract, we negotiated that there would be a vote by the table games dealers and the poker dealers to decide whether or not to separate the tips. And we did, because we had a union contract, we were able to get information about what would the impact of that be. So we did a study so people knew in advance what that vote would mean. And it was a much more informed decision that way. And in the end, they did vote to separate, and the poker dealers are quite happy, now it's about 2 years later, with that separation. And the table games dealers were not hurt by it. But everybody knew that because of the studies we did. Recently, in the last negotiations, the employer wanted to change the pooling to a daily tip pool as opposed to a weekly. And there was tremendous debate at bargaining about it, but ultimately we agreed we would have a vote on that by the dealers. It's always been our position that it really should be up to the dealers because they're the ones who earn the tips. And the vote happened a couple of weeks ago, and they voted to keep the pooling on a weekly basis. The main argument for that is that tips go up on the weekends. So if you're a senior dealer, you would be inclined to want to work the weekends and get the higher tips. But it really affects the quality of life because people under our contract earn weekend days off to be with their family based on seniority. So you feel like you're working towards something, and to have that ability to go to the soccer games and to go to the, to be with the family. And so it really was interesting to see that people chose, senior dealers chose the quality of life issue and said, no, we want to keep our weekend days so that we can be with our families. And it was interesting because they are far outnumbered by dealers who are less senior. But those less senior dealers saw the future that they could get there too. So, and I think, I talked to the employer there recently, and, they had wanted another outcome, but it was really interesting because he was very gracious and said, look, the workers got to decide what was best for them. And so I think it was a really great example where without collective bargaining, we know from other places that decision would have been made by the employer exclusively, and it would have held up in court as an employer decision. So,
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Barry, that somebody else from UAW came in and talked to us about workforce safety,
that's right.
right?
Mary?
359 days.
359 days ago? Wow.
To be exact.
Yeah, from Foxwoods, right. And I remember saying at the time, and Jill, I'm going to say it again, that there is, as Enrique was saying, we don't really know how to judge these things and what to look for, whether it's an agreement in a labor harmony agreement, or whether it's workforce safety issues. So we need to make sure that the loop is closed so that we've got some advice on what we're looking for when we're evaluating these proposals, and maybe even what we should clarify in the proposals.
To that point, I think one of the things that I would hope you would look at is what are the developers doing here, the operators, to sign labor harmony agreements here. So for instance, one of the developers in Ohio might have a very good labor harmony agreement like the one Jim described.
Who's your operator?
Two separate ones. One is Caesars Entertainment. The other one is
Penn National.
Penn Gaming. Thank you.
But the same employer in another place might not have a labor harmony agreement, and I've had experience with, I'm not going to say which one of those, where they actually, let me retract that, aggressively oppose the union. So it really is important to know what they're going to do here and what agreements they've signed here. And I think the other piece of it, is that they cover all the classifications, as I mentioned, so that the dealers don't get left out of the equation. A third piece is to look for timeliness, because you want the process to move quickly. And so that workers don't have to, if you sign cards and you want to have a union, you want to get in negotiations, if it's a delayed process, it's really to their disadvantage to have to wait, like they have, some of them, for years to have a first collective bargaining agreement. And then enforceability, so that there's real clear enforcement. If there's a violation, that enforcement has to be very quick. I'm negotiating an agreement with another employer. It's not public yet. It's not in gaming, but it will call for a 48-hour arbitration in the event of a claim of a violation, so that it can be remedied very quickly, so it doesn't, it can taint the opportunity for a fair process, because it's really hard to retract negative statements.
Yeah.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, to your point, all this is helpful is, and Jill is part of the Economic Development Evaluation team that's looking at this, but we've even been drafting a question for the follow-up conversations we have out in the host community agreements to say, this is where you were as to the date of your application. Now, almost 2 months later, where are you? And see if they can provide us an update.
And I can tell you, we've offered to meet with all the developers. We have not signed an agreement yet. We would like to. We would like to work with all of them. We think that that's really critical. So I think to the extent that the commission makes that part of the process, it will be impossible for them to say, well, we'll see later. I know that in Connecticut, when they passed when the two Indian casinos came into being, they were done through, it was done through compacts. And during the process of negotiating the compacts, the state legislature did not include labor harmony, and they decided that could come after the fact. But I can assure you that once one of these developers has the license, there is no impetus to reach a labor harmony agreement. So I really think that you ought to look at the fact that it needs to be done before the licenses are granted.
What's the status of our 3 applications that we already have in? Isn't there a question about labor harmony agreements in the evaluation?
Yeah, there's a question, but I don't know that there are labor harmony agreements executed with all.
Yeah, I don't know if there, I mean, obviously, yeah, not a lot of dealers at the slots parlor, but.
Oh,
But-
that's true.
That's
the slots
difficulty.
part, yeah.
And that's a difficulty. Well, and or others, other job classifications as well. I mean,
And I do want to make sure you remember we represent Newport Grand, which is a slots parlor, and we represent the folks there. So we are interested, I mean, we're just generally interested that even if it's not our union that ends up representing these workers, I will say that there's no question that having a unionized workforce will, in the long term, make these better, more secure, and better benefited jobs for the long term. And that's what I think you all want in Massachusetts.
It sounds like, Jim, you had the most ideal situation in Ohio in terms of the
I
cooperation you
second
got
what
from
you
your
said
operator.
too just now.
Yeah. Good.
Anything else?
No, thank you, it's very helpful.
Excellent.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Great,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks for
making the road
coming in. Yeah, I
trips.
appreciate your coming so far.
No problem.
Stick around for a while.
I have to head back home after work tomorrow.
I'm going to try to catch a Bruins.
But she hadn't been to Boston before, so she was very excited.
Is it?
Oh, great, well, come back.
It is a little chilly. Good idea.
Yes.
You're a Red Sox fan now.
Yeah.
Well, I am, I can tell you that. I went down to Fenway last night to a sports bar
Oh,
when I finished my work because I wanted to watch the UConn women play basketball.
wow.
Nobody carried it, so it's like,
Nobody carried it.
no. But they won.
Thank you very much.
They won.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we've done our agenda. Am I right?
Mr. Chairman, one quick point that came up, and Jill, don't walk away, in more of an issue to talk about with legal counsel as we're looking at vendor regulations, or licensing regulations. The point was made to Jill, and she passed it along about, should we look at licensing requirements for our operators with respect to student interns, people not gainfully employed by an operator, but should we think about having licensing requirements for that category of an individual? I mean, one of our applicants is talking about working with a community college with respect to internships. So I know it's not on our agenda, but I throw it out as something that got brought to our attention. Maybe we ought to invite council to think about it as we're going ahead with the regs, but it was an interesting viewpoint that was shared with Jill and I, and something we ought to think about.
And, and David's feedback would be interesting too. Right, Director Acosta. Anything else? Anybody? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you, everybody.